Okay, the second Punisher story of Punisher Annual number 1. Not exactly a Punisher story altogether. This is actually a Microchip story. Our creative team here, Roger Salick writing, Mike Vosberg on art, lettered by Kenneth Bruzenek, and colored by Christy Scheel. One thing I want to point out here is Roger Salick, and I just took a look at his work on Mike's Amazing World of Comics, and this is very interesting because Roger actually starts writing in January of '87 for First Comics Nexus, issue number 33, it looks like. And he does that for quite a while, up until his first Marvel work, which is this story we're about to get into with Three Hearts. And then he goes back to First Comics, continues to work on Nexus, a comic called Crossroads is in there, Hawk Moon. First Comics, he's working for them for a solid year up until Punisher Annual number 2, and he comes back and tells another story in the Punisher Annual, goes back to First Comics, works on those for a little longer, and then his next Marvel work is Punisher Annual number 3. So I thought that was interesting that Roger Salick, he's writing and for First Comics, and he just the only 3 Marvel works that he does between 1987 and 1990 are Punisher Annuals. So I dug it. I thought that was an interesting just little bit of trivia there. So before we get into Three Hearts, we got to take a look at the characters again. Our main characters involved in this, and Punisher's not going to show up. We have Microchip, Frank Castle's longtime ally and technical support. He's the guy behind much of the Punisher's equipment, surveillance, weapons, vehicles, and information. He's not the one usually kicking down doors, but he is extremely intelligent, resourceful, and capable of handling himself when he has to. We also have Felicia, an old friend of Microchip's late wife, Sally. She and Micro share a connection through their past, and her son, Rudy, is also Micro's godson. Rudy himself doesn't play a major role in the action, but he is important to the story. A cadet at Annapolis, and Micro cares deeply about protecting both him and his mother. Then there's Jim Nugent, Felicia's recent husband. On the surface, Jim appears to be an ordinary man, but Felicia has recently discovered that there is much more going on beneath that exterior. And finally, there are the men Jim is associated with, a group involved in political assassinations and other violent activity. They're not major characters individually, but they help establish just how serious the situation surrounding Felicia has become. Now, as we get into the story, we open up at Microchip's warehouse in New Jersey, where he's working on an unusual side job. An industrialist friend has hired him to armor an expensive Italian car, and Micro is testing the finished product by opening fire on it. The armor holds. It's a small scene, but tells us right away what kind of world Micro lives in. Technology, weapons, surveillance, armored vehicles. This is his element. After finishing up, Micro heads out to visit an old friend named Felicia. Felicia was close to Micro's wife Sally, and her son Rudy is Micro's godson. Micro was also friends with Felicia's husband Ben. Rudy is currently a cadet at Annapolis, and Felicia is deeply worried about something that could destroy his future. After her first husband, Ben, died, Felicia remarried by the name of Jim Nugent. And according to Felicia, Jim has been hiding a very dark secret. He has been involved in the assassination of politicians. Felicia explains that Jim admitted it to her, believing the money he was making from these killings could repair their marriage. She is terrified to go to the authorities because she believes the scandal could ruin Rudy's future at Annapolis. During the conversation, Micro recalls an old saying that everyone has 3 hearts. One they show to the world, one they keep hidden, and one even they themselves do not know exists. And it appears Felicia has discovered one of Jim's hidden hearts. Micro realizes the danger may be even more immediate than she thinks. He notices a suspicious man outside posing as a utility worker, and when Micro investigates the other half of Felicia's duplex, he finds a large amount of C4 wired to a timer. There's no time to disarm it. Micro grabs Felicia, rushes her outside, and manages to get them into his car just before the house explodes behind them. Someone has clearly decided Felicia knows too much. Micro takes her back to his warehouse where she can stay safely while he starts digging into Jim's background. His investigation leads him to Jim's office building. Rather than going inside, Micro rents a cheap hotel room a few blocks away and begins surveillance from a distance. Using a small listening device, he bugs Jim's office and hears exactly what he needs to hear. Jim is meeting with two accomplices, and they are furious that the attempt on Felicia's life failed. They tell Jim that his wife is becoming a liability and that he needs to eliminate her himself. Micro now has confirmation. Felicia and Rudy are in real danger, and Micro has to decide what he's willing to do about it. For a moment, he questions himself. Can he actually handle this? Can he take the kind of action Frank Castle takes every day? Then Micro answers his own question. Yes. But he's going to do it his own way. And for that, he decides he needs Carl. Carl who? Carl turns out to be a Carl Gustav anti-tank weapon. From his hotel room, Micro carefully checks that no innocent people are inside the office building near Jim and his partners. Satisfied that his targets are alone, he shoulders the weapon, takes aim, and fires. The round slams into the office and blows the room apart. Micro calmly packs up his equipment and leaves the hotel. When the desk clerk asks if he heard the tremendous noise upstairs, Micro dismisses it as a lover's quarrel in the next room. But Jim Nugent isn't dead. Somehow, he survived the explosion. Badly shaken, Jim grabs a weapon and tries to escape before the police arrive. Unfortunately, he's not fast enough. Officers reach the scene and attempt to stop him, but Jim opens fire, steals a police car, and takes off. Micro has been watching the situation unfold, so now he follows. A car chase begins through the city. Jim eventually realizes Micro is pursuing him and starts firing into Micro's vehicle. But Jim has made a serious mistake. The beat-up Plymouth Fury Micro is driving may not look like much, but underneath its tough exterior, it has been heavily armored. Jim's bullets accomplish absolutely nothing. Micro keeps after him and eventually forces the stolen police car off the road and into a railroad yard, where Jim crashes into a stationary boxcar. Micro approaches the wreck with a gun. Jim recognizes him. Now both men understand exactly what this is about. But Micro doesn't shoot him. Instead, he offers Jim a deal. Micro reveals that he recorded Jim and his associates discussing the attempt on Felicia's life. He tells Jim that copies of the recording will go straight to the district attorney if anything happens to either Micro or Felicia. But Micro claims he has a problem of his own. If he turns Jim in directly, he could implicate himself in the deaths of Jim's associates. So Micro offers Jim an escape. He says, "Take the Plymouth Fury. Drive away. Disappear." Jim is suspicious but eventually accepts the offer. He climbs into Micro's car and drives away, believing he has somehow managed to survive this entire mess. Micro watches him go. Then he rolls up his sleeve. Hidden on his wrist is a remote control, and Micro reveals that there are actually two problems Jim doesn't know about. First, there's a thermite device hidden inside the Fury. The second, sometimes Microchip lies. He presses the button, the Plymouth explodes in the distance, and as Micro watches the fireball, Three Hearts comes to an end, having shown us that there may be a side of Microchip that even he didn't realize was there. All right, my thoughts on this one. I did enjoy this one. I enjoyed this quite a bit because I went into it expecting Frank to eventually show up. I figured Microchip would get in over his head, things would become too much for him, and eventually he'd have to call the Punisher to even the score. But that doesn't happen. Micro handles the entire situation himself, and I think that's what makes this such a good backup story for an annual. That was pretty typical for annuals back in the 80s and 90s. I mean, even today, you have your big main story, usually tied into whatever event was happening, and then you get these smaller backup stories that could focus on supporting characters or tell something a little different. And I think Three Hearts is exactly the kind of backup that works. It's not just another Punisher story. Instead, it gives us a closer look at Microchip, what his life looks away from Frank, and maybe, more importantly, what he's actually capable of doing when Frank isn't around. Roger Salick does a good job with that, especially considering this was his first Marvel work. The story never feels out of place. He doesn't try to throw Microchip into some giant superhero situation where he clearly wouldn't belong. He keeps everything very street level and personal. Now, firing a Carl Gustav anti-tank weapon out of a hotel room might be stretching the definition of street level just a little bit, but this is also late 80s Punisher. We're living in a world of bazookas, cannons, explosions, and action movie excess, so somehow it still feels perfectly appropriate. But what I really like, though, was that this story adds some weight to Microchip as a character. Up until now, we've primarily known him as the guy who helps Frank. He gets the weapons, the surveillance equipment, finds information, provides vehicles and technology in order for Frank to wage his war. Here we find out that when things become personal, Microchip can take care of business himself. And there's a moment in the story where he actually has to ask himself whether he can do this. That's important. Microchip is not Frank Castle. Killing somebody isn't something he does every day. He actually has to sit there and think about whether he has it in him. And then he decides that he does. That he must. And that's where I think the title Three Hearts becomes really interesting. The story gives us that saying that everyone supposedly has three hearts, one they show to the world, one they keep hidden, and one they didn't even know exists. At first, you could assume that's talking about Jim. He's the guy married to Felicia, and eventually she discovers there is a completely different person underneath the man she thought she knew. But I think it applies to Microchip too here. Maybe Micro didn't know that this part of himself existed. Maybe he didn't know whether he was actually capable of killing somebody until somebody threatened people he cared about. And maybe Frank has influenced him somewhat as well. I'm not sure that Frank necessarily changed Microchip's morality or anything like that, because if you're helping the Punisher do what he does every day, there's probably already some part of you that agrees with that mission. You don't provide guns and surveillance equipment to Frank Castle while completely disagreeing with how he uses them. But Frank has certainly had a major impact on Microchip's life. And that's especially interesting when you remember what has already happened with Micro's son. He lost his son as a result of this world he's become involved in with Frank, and surprisingly, we really haven't dug very deeply into that. I have to imagine that eventually comes back around. So when Micro decides that Felicia and his godson Rudy are in danger, it makes sense that he goes to extreme lengths to protect them. This isn't just another mission, these are connections to his old life. Felicia was friends with his wife Sally, wife to his friend Ben. Rudy is his godson. That makes this personal. I'm a little less convinced by Felicia refusing to go to the police because she's worried about what it would do to Rudy's future. That feels more like the story needing a reason to involve Microchip instead of the authorities. But I can also accept that maybe she knows enough about Micro to understand that he can help her. Once Micro gets involved, though, I like the way he handles everything. He's not going to kick the door down like Frank. He uses surveillance, bugs the office, watches from a distance. He makes sure that he understands what he's dealing with. And when it comes time to attack, he uses an anti-tank weapon from several blocks away because Micro knows perfectly well that getting into a straight gunfight with these people probably isn't going to end too well for him. That still makes his methods similar to Frank's in some ways. Microchip supplies Frank with this kind of technology all the time. Now we're just seeing Micro use those tools himself. And I really like the armored Plymouth Fury. The story establishes earlier that Micro knows how to armor vehicles, so later when Jim starts shooting into this beat-up looking Plymouth, and the bullets do absolutely nothing, there's a nice payoff. It looks terrible on the outside, but underneath, This thing is built to survive. I also didn't mind Jim surviving the explosion at the office. If Micro had fired that anti-tank round, blown everybody up, and that was just the end of the story, it would nowhere have been as satisfying an ending. Jim surviving gives us another act. It allows Jim to understand who's coming after him, and most importantly, it sets up that ending, because that ending is probably my favorite thing in this story. Micro convinces Jim that he's going to let him leave. He basically says, "Take my car, get out of here, we'll call it even." And Jim thinks he's got away with it. And then Micro pushes the button. Boom. The car explodes. Micro was never letting this man walk away. He was making sure that Felicia and Rudy would never have to worry about him again. And that final line, "Now and then, I lie." Great little stinger, because it brings us back around to the title. Maybe this is one of Microchip's 3 hearts. Maybe this is the part of himself that even he didn't know was there. And that's why I think this story works best as a backup. I enjoy seeing Microchip get his own story and that he can hold his own, but I don't necessarily need a bunch of Microchip solo stories right now. He's not Robin. He's more like Q from James Bond. He's the guy behind the scenes with the gadgets and the weapons, information, and technology that make the mission possible. You can absolutely tell a good story with Q every once in a while, but I just don't need a monthly Q comic. So I think 3 hearts gives me just enough.